because he promised me a load of dough. And then I watched that fucking video he put out the other day, and that's when I found out I did it for fucking free. Cunts. You smell burning?
If my bus had double deckers, Lee'd be on it. It's that beard, it's the quiff, it's the Lego hair, it's everything.
So Dave and Paul run a really lovely music shop in Nottingham called Abbey Road Music, and I was, as often, just popped in there on a Saturday afternoon, having a cup of coffee, playing a few of the guitars, spending time with Dave, talking rubbish really. And I think Dave was absolutely sick and tired of me just whittling away.
I was sat in the shop one day, and Lee sat there, whittling away, and I'm going, I'm sure I didn't teach you that bit.
I met Dave when I was about 14. I could already play, but I needed to understand the modes. I was listening to things like, Passion and Warfare, and there were just things theoretically that I just didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I've known Lee since he was he was tall, but he was young. He was 14. Budding young guitar player. So we did about 3 or 4 or 5 months worth of lessons, and he was one of the few that practiced a lot, and then he got good.
My dad taught me to play guitar when I was very young, and like pentatonic stuff and the blues scale and the basic chords, and I just used to enjoy playing songs, playing Queen songs, Dire Straits, all that kind of stuff. And then I got into players later on, because there was always music in the house, always Hendrix, Django Reinhardt, Les Paul, Mary Ford, just everybody really, always playing. And my dad would play in cover bands, playing Clapton tunes, Dire Straits tunes, and I'd go and watch him, so he was my first guitar hero. And it all progressed from there. So my dad said, you need to go and find someone who can teach you, what's going on with the music theory. And he found the local kingpin of guitar tuition in Nottinghamshire, in England, and that was Mr. David Buckley.
So Lee's playing away, and I said, some of this stuff's really good, man, why don't you record it? Let's get some content. The reason you should do an album, Lee, is because you've not done a good one. Do a good one, you're very talented, what you're mucking about at, get on with it. I think they were my words.
I think Dave was absolutely sick and tired of me just whittling away, and he said, you need to go and get an album. You need to put an album together. I was like, well, yeah, I've made some demo albums. He said, no. You need to do a proper album in a studio. You need to come over to the studio and do a proper job of it. Now, at the time, I was in quite a dark place because of things that had happened to me. Nothing too bad in the grand scheme of things, but just bad enough to have put me in a pretty low point in my life. Lots of changes going on, moving house and all of that sort of stuff. And so I was pretty morose, and those two, both Dave and Paul, really helped me out of that. But they did it in a way, they used music to do it. So they're like, come down on a Thursday night, so let's start putting some things together, bring your ideas along, and all that sort of stuff. And it grew from there.
And then we said, need a good drummer. So obviously we looked around, couldn't find anybody. And then you went, I better pick Oza then. Can't we get nobody good? No.
I was in a band in 1994, 95. It was just a rock band. One of the guys in the band was still at college, and he'd got us to play a venue that's long gone now called the Narrowboat in Nottingham. They were all college bands, except for this one guy called Lee, who was sat on the stage on his own and played For the Love of God, Steve Vai.
So I met Paul back in around 1994. I was 17 years old. I was playing a gig at a place called the Narrowboat in Nottingham in England, which has long since been demolished, I think. And it was a college band gig. So there's all those bands there, all my friends who were playing, you know, pop music and rock music, popular stuff. And they said, "Oh, are you going to come and play as well?" And I didn't have a band. And I managed to get a kind of backing track together of a couple of songs. I played For the Love of God, and I think I played Always With Me, Always With You as well, a Joe Satriani song. And I just sat on stage, no stage presence whatsoever, sat down, cross-legged, and played the songs.
And I remember thinking, wow, blimey, you know, because I hadn't heard Passion and Warfare at that point, but there he was. I sat on the stage playing it on a red guitar, I think. Can't remember the brand, but it was a red guitar. Anyway, that's when we met. You were sat there like you still do, you know, one leg over the other, just playing along, looking down. Don't give a fuck about anyone else. And there I am. and then, you know, I was like, come on, get off the fucking stage, it's our turn. But no, actually, it was. Oh, not much has changed, actually. No, 20 plus years. Done now.
And Paul was playing in a band at the time. They might have been headlining it, and that's how I met him. And he's an absolutely lovely chap, and I've known him for a very long time. One of my best friends. You
know, if I think back, technically rudimentary, it was all there. But obviously, when you're a teenager, you haven't perhaps got the expressive tools, have you? Because you haven't lived, you haven't been wounded, you know.
And Paul and I share many of the same influences bands-wise, like people like Queen, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all those kinds of characters. And so we have a real kinship when it comes to music. And Paul's a great listener. You know, he enjoys music. He thinks about the band. He's not just thinking about individual performances. So he's been a great asset to this project because he's come along and listened and tried to create a band atmosphere, really. And that's been superb.
This album in particular has been really interesting because if I think back to the first songs that we recorded, slow to mid-tempo, melancholic, cathartic tunes, to some really energetic, exciting tunes. Actually, there's a lot on the album. You could listen to this album in one go and enjoy it, or you could dip in and out depending on the mood of the listener, I think. You can drive along with the window down, or you can rock out and headbang, or you can have a bit of a cry, actually, can't you? It's all there. I think people will be surprised. Some of the sessions were really relaxed, and the tunes are intuitive. You know, I'm just playing time. You know, I'm just providing sort of a steady undercurrent. Some of the tunes are really challenging. The way Dave produces, where he would have me do take after take after take. Keep going, Lee. Come on, put him on the rails, a little fucker. Keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. I like it when I can't hear you. So when I was listening back to what we'd recorded on the rough mixers, it was surprising because we'd all record so much stuff. I don't actually know how Dave did it.
We used a few clever tricks in the studio. We needed the dead snare for Mr. Hose.
I've got 4 drums in front of me and it goes D, A, V.
And I kept saying to him, that snare's ringing. It's ringing like a fucking church bell. Get it damped. I can't, I've got no gear. I've got no gel. Right. So I walked into the kitchen and I got a dirty, smelly old rag.
Flannel.
A flannel that I used to wipe my bollocks when it gets too sweaty up here. I run it under the tap, make sure it's all clean enough. Right. I went, here Paul, put this cloth on it, it'll sound great. Oh, that sounds mint, you. That sounds like one of them old Ludwigs, it sounds great. Paul wouldn't know. Paul Paul didn't have a clue. He just thought, I've wet you this flannel because it needs to be damp. It'll stay in place if it's damp. So there we are, on top of the snare drum. Sounded brilliant, to be fair. He never figured out why we were cracking up in here. Because we were cracking up in here while I was playing. It was just his face, that face he's got.
So like, go on then, I'm ready. Come on!
Now I started creating tracks, you know, at home. So I'll create the basis of a track in Logic, play in the parts, play in some of the keys. I'll already have the melodies. A lot of it starts sometimes with guitar, and then I move on to creating the track to fit with the melody that I've written or the chord progression that I've created. And then sometimes it's completely flipped on its head. So I will just create using keys, and then afterwards add guitars, and the guitars then just become the icing on the cake, if you like. So yeah, that's how it started. And I would come here, we sat at home creating tracks, and then I would get them to a fairly decent level and then take them into the studio, record the guitars properly. We got Paul's drums down. I'd go back and re-record parts after we got Paul's drum parts down.
We would then recreate bass on top of drums, rhythm guitars on top of that. Virtually all the solo parts, all the percussion, and all of that came on afterwards. Without a solid framework, you've no track. Even if it's empty space, it still has to have a solid framework. And ultimately what I'm looking for is to create a certain sonic tonality that I hear in the music that I envisage as a certain type of sound.
Dave would create these basic mixes that he'd send out, and then we'd listen and go, okay, it needs something else. And Dave was such a great ear for a tune and for a song. So he was kind of going, yeah, do you know what, there's something missing. Why don't you have a think about percussion on the track? So then I would go, okay, go away and do it, send it back, and he'd be like, yeah, I can use that. And I just sent so much stuff over to Dave. I mean, there were, on some of the tracks, pushing 60 or 70, you know, stems of strings and choirs and all kinds of different stuff. And it was his job to really kind of piece that together in a mix and make that work. And it was, you know, his work ethic on it was incredible. Hundreds and hundreds of hours just on the mixing and the mastering process. And you can really tell when you listen to the tracks, you know, that you can hear every single element of the music, every single piece of part has its own little space in the sonic universe, and it's fantastic.
But all three of us are really strong personalities, so I know I would come in and say, well, can that drum solo section, can that be twice the length? Because we need it, it needs time to grow and build. And Leah, all credit to him, would go, okay, that's fine. And then Dave would say, no, we need more of this and we need more of that and a lot less of that, and you know, and all of us were mature enough to just get on with it and do it, which I'm not sure we would have done 10 years ago. I think we'd have been quite protective and defensive. But we pushed really hard, and then there would be weeks where you wouldn't hear any of the mixes, and then an email had come in and there'd be a file share, and there it was, and it's like, wow, is that me? Probably isn't. But it's interesting though, because you know, if I think about Dave and Lee, you know, Lee's creative mind is genuinely brilliant. Dave knows how to build a tune. You have Lee with all the compositions. The sessions would inspire Lee, because I know he'd get, you know, he'd get a guest guitar solo come through, and then, you know, that would inspire him, and he'd go away and rewrite it. So then we'd have to re-record the drums, and you know, and all of that. So the creative process, I think, was inspiring to Lee. Equally as much for Dave, because Dave's coming at the other angle where it's got to be a credible tune. It's got to make sense organically. So Dave's ear with Lee's mind was brilliant, and they were both big enough to let each other have the space to create and to work.
you then get to the point of trying to work out what the mastering process, the end product of the mastering process is going to be. Well, mixing process before the mastering process is going to be. And what you're really looking for is to create an image. So at that point, I don't know whether I'm going to use a wide stereo image or whether I'm going to use a tight one. So for the 7-lit Aliens, everything is right down the pan, because it is basically a rock song in 7. I'll probably have a left and right for both guitars, of the three, the two rhythm tracks, a centre track of each of the 3, so there might be 6 altogether, and then throughout the tune I might actually rearrange that stereo image within that 3 guitar piece, and then that will be sounding like one guitar in a sense. So there'll be some slight overlaps, there'll be reverbs applied to parts rather than the whole thing.
I remember working on 7-lit Aliens, and I'd got this idea for a groove, and I'd worked really hard on it, and Lee just said, nope, don't want that, I want this. And I thought, well, yeah. And then I played it, and actually I can't think of playing anything else now. So that's really interesting, isn't it?
I wrote the tracks at various different stages of me becoming a happier person. And the music sometimes reflects that, and not often it doesn't. It's almost like the opposite of what you're feeling at the time, and the music then has helped you to feel a different way. A great example of that is 7-lit Aliens. So I wrote that. My dad had a major cardiac event and had to go in and have a really intense surgery, which was like really out of the blue, emergency surgery, and he was in under the knife for about 9 hours, and there was nothing I could do. The doctor said, look, there's no point you waiting, we will be at least 9 hours, go home, get some rest and then come back. So I went back home. What do you do with yourself? The only thing I could do was just pick up the guitar, and out came this like little bit of a frantic, funky thing, because obviously inside there was some turmoil going on. You'd think that you'd write something morose and kind of melancholy, the potential of losing your father. This was the anxiety, the tension that was in me that had to come out. And so that was the piece that was written around that time. And in other tracks, I did a lot of travelling over those 2 years, different clinics. I was in China, I was in a place called Fushan, and that was a fantastic experience. So many people turned up to the clinic, and I needed to create a track that I could play, because it was kind of out of the blue, will you come and play this gig? Can you bring a couple of tracks? So I wrote the track in a hotel room and then took it out. People enjoyed it, so I included it in this album. So the album is very much like that.
Because people won't know this until they watch stuff like this, for me, I think the album was written in 2 halves, because I think Lee was in 2 halves. If you think about the, as I said earlier, all that cathartic stuff in the beginning. You fast forward a year, 18 months, Lee's in a completely different place. Compositionally, stuff was happening with huge sample libraries and sound packs and stuff, and that rewrote the album.
As we got the basic tracks done, and then I started to invest a little bit more time and energy and money into it, and started to get hold of some of the really good quality sound libraries, so that when I'm creating parts and I'm using a synth, or I don't know, it could be a choir, that they were the best ones I could get hold of, and not just something that I found within Logic. So I invested a lot in the East-West sound libraries. Can't recommend them highly enough. They are fantastic, such good quality. And so then went back over all the tracks and started adding this extra stuff, much to Dave's pain, because he had to go back and remix things. But it really, there was a moment where that really lifted the album. Everything sounded great, but then this new stuff that was being put on over the top, and made it part of it, it just really lifted the quality of the album. So I think you can really hear that. You hear the choir parts, you hear string sections and things like that, particularly on Until the End, parts 1 and 2. you can really hear the quality of those symphonic sound libraries shining through.
You know, that clear mind, that new place that Lee ended up being in. The album is written in two halves for me, and I think it sounds like that. But it will do for me, and I think it will do for Lee, and I think it maybe even Dave. But it is one piece of work, isn't it? It is one body of work. But the biggest memory is the laughter. I mean, there must be somewhere hours of video and hours of certainly me getting it wrong, and that laughter must be all over it. It was just brilliant. Best thing I've ever done musically. I remember Dave saying, right, that's it, you're done. Because we'd spent nearly 2 years recording this. So every week we'd come in, do a bit, listen to a bit, do a bit. We'd have listening sessions. We tried to work through the World Cup, got nothing done. We had Christmas nights where we'd watch films and, you know, eat great food and get nothing done. But actually, maybe that was the best stuff. And so I felt sad when the project came to an end. I still get super excited, but, you know, full-time dreamer with stuff like that. If we're doing it, we're doing it, you know. Whereas Lee would have this, well, you know, no one's going to listen to it, no, or people won't like it. And I'm like, no, this is awesome, you know, this is, because it is. I think the people that we know, they won't believe it, you know. They'll be like, wow, I didn't think you were that good. And then of course you've got the people that we all work with, because like Lee's fortunate, he's surrounded by a lot of people that love him and love working with him, and they've heard clips of this album because it's been used on promo stuff that Lee's done. But when they hear it in its entirety, I think they'll be blown away.
I think finishing the album for me was when I could. The best part about that was signing it off and saying, I can do no more. And Lee went, neither can I. That's wrap it. Let's do it. That's it. It's finished. And then you maybe got a friend or a partner or a mate or whoever sitting in the car with you, scrounging a lift, and you're driving along, you put the album on and you don't tell them what it is, just to see what their reaction is, and they go, what's this? And I go, it's my mate, it's good, isn't it? What is it? It's Lee's new album. No! Yes it is. Wow, that sounds amazing. That's the good part. When people you don't know, or don't know what you're doing or what you're listening to, will turn to you and say, that sounds amazing, and they mean it. Not everybody's going to like it, but just one person, that's all you need, because there's a lot of one persons out there.
So really, I mean, there's a number of people across the world that I'm in touch with. They're always commenting on posts and videos, and it's fantastic to feel that support. So really, this music, as much as it was for me to feel better, it's for you guys as well, if you are even the slightest bit interested in my music. So thank you all for your support. It's just wonderful, and it gives me inspiration to keep making more music. And I hope it inspires you to go and make your own. You know, it's not difficult these days to get a computer that will give you the basics to be able to start creating music, and you don't have to have played for decades to be able to make a great song. You know, some of the best songs in the world were made with 3 or 4 chords, and it's that simple really. So you should, if you feel in any way, if you enjoy the music in any way, shape or form, and you are a musician, you should start writing your own music and getting it out there, let people hear it, because that's the beauty of it, isn't it? So I took the opportunity and said, okay, let's release it through Revolver, and they created, you know, some wonderful things. I've got the album cover and the album here, so it's really cool, kind of like a record disc CD, and an 8-page booklet that comes with it. And inside that, because of this 8-page booklet, I was able to talk about the individual tracks and, you know, where they came from, how they were recorded, all that kind of stuff. And the beauty of it is, it's being released worldwide. So anywhere in the world, you'll be able to get yourself a copy of this album on CD. And obviously across all the platforms like Spotify, Amazon, iTunes and all that sort of stuff. So the digital stuff as well. So I think from my perspective, it was the right thing to do, to work with a label. From a distribution perspective alone, it was super useful. So that was my choice to make with the album. It might not be for everybody. Lots of people self-release these days, and that's great. For this particular project, that's what I decided to do. Some of the guitars I used on the album, they started off with mainly my RGs and S's and that sort of stuff. And then the prototype AZ came about, and I started to use that for obvious reasons, because it, just was the right guitar for me. So at various points there were the AZs, and then later, much later, started to use the swirled AZ, which is basically a premium AZ, whereas the prototype is of prestige level, made in Japan. Yeah, so I can't thank Ibanez Guitars enough. They're incredible instruments, wonderful people to work with, and now for, a real passion for music, and people, they really believe that music and playing music helps to change people's lives. And so that is something that makes us all passionate about, doing a good job for them, and the instruments they make are superb. And none of the album would sound anything near as good as it does without the Laney amps that I used throughout. So I'm using the Lionheart, the L20T 212, which is a dual speaker, single-ended Class A. It's a beautiful boutique, a real kind of pedal platform as well. So a good proportion of the album is just that L20T with various pedals popped in front of it. And then also the GH30R, which is a fantastic amp and a real fire breather when it needs to be. And then also the IRT, the Ironheart as well. Not the combo, I was using actually the IRT Studio. So if I recorded parts here, that's what I would use. I'd get the dry signal on the left, I'd have the wet signal from the IRT on the right, and then I could just send that dry signal back at the studio with Dave and reamp it. So, such great amps, so versatile, so really easy to use, and made me sound better. So thanks very much, guys. So I guess that's it. That's kind of the story of the album. If you're interested in it, I really hope you enjoy the album. If you do get a chance to listen to it, I'd love to hear what your comments and your thoughts are on it. I'm always interested in how the tracks make people feel, or where they go off to in a headspace. Because we always do that with instrumental music, don't we? That's why it's used in films and video games and all that kind of stuff. You are kind of sent on a bit of a journey often. So I'd be super interested to hear what your thoughts are on it, and please let me know in the comments section below. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Until the next video, take care of yourselves.